The storm split the night as waves clawed the reef and the moon bled pale fire. Lyra hovered between sea and sky, her song a blade that once obeyed. She breathed fear when the keel groaned. Elias said, "Hold fast," and his voice cut through wind like a bright bell. The note struck Lyra's melody, and the air snapped with blue fractures. She tasted silence where power should bloom. Lyra said, "What are you?" And the lightning answered with white scars. Elias gripped the mast and sang again, raw and steady, and the sea bowed low. Her heart lurched, not from hunger, but from wonder that hurt. The hull veered, ropes screamed, and destiny leaned close enough to drown. Lyra said, "Stop before I vanish," yet the plea was a whisper wrapped in rain. He heard nothing but the truth inside the song, and the truth unmade her veil. The reef lit like a cathedral of glass, and they stared across the ruin of old rules. Dawn bled into pewter as the storm limped away and left the cove hollow. Lyra drifted beneath a kelp awning where shadows stitched her to quiet. Her breath found a rhythm that did not summon hunger. She remembered the fracture where his voice had met hers. Lyra said, "You broke me open," and the thought cut like soft glass. The tide tugged at secrets older than her name. She feared the calm more than the gale, because calm invited truth. Driftwood tapped the rocks and counted choices. Lyra said, "If I return, I will vanish," and silence weighed heavy. Yet wonder grew like a seed that could split stone. She hid from the shore, but not from the ache that was becoming hope. Elias walked the strand with boots soaked and a tune caged behind his teeth. He gathered torn rope and questions, and kept glancing at the water. The night's miracle clung to his ribs like heat. Elias said, "If I sing again, what will I undo?" And gulls answered with rough laughter. He feared wreckers more than myths, yet myths had saved him. The keel scar in sand pointed back to danger and wonder. He hummed a fragment, and the tide lifted, then stilled. Elias said, "Come back if you are real," and the wind carried it thin. He was not hunting a monster, only a truth that sang back. Each step wrote a promise he did not yet understand. Elder Mira watched the tide marks like old scars and lit a lantern against the noon gloom. She knew songs that once ruled weather and priced them in blood. Mira said, "Some voices bind, and some unbind," and ash drifted from her wick like snow. She had warned girls with bright eyes and darker gifts. Lyra arrived with silence stitched to her throat. Mira said, "You met a counter hymn, and the room cool." Lyra nodded and hid the tremble that joy brought. The world would tax joy, and Mira had the ledger. She drew a sigil that smelled of brine and regret. Mira said, "If you love him, you may lose the sea," and the lantern flickered as if it agreed. In a tower stitched from black glass, Corvin tasted the air and smiled without warmth. The wards hummed wrong, like strings tuned to grief. Corvin said, "A seam has opened, and mirrors along the wall darkened." He loved order that bent to his hand, and chaos made fine bait. He traced a circle, and the ink spread like oil across snow. A chart revealed a cove, and a name he had broken once. Corvin said, "Bring me the singer and the breaker," and the command rode ravens west. He did not chase storms. Storms came when called. The sea disliked him, but fear obeyed. He planned to teach the tide a simpler song. Elias staggered from the rocks, his breath shallow as he dragged himself clear of the wrecker's trap. Nets and stakes littered the cove, but unseen hands had cut a path. Lyra lingered in the foam, her song silent, but her gaze tethered to him. She thought, "If I help again, I am lost," yet she guided a log beneath his reach. Elias said, "Whoever guards me, I owe my life," as he pulled ashore. His chest ached with bruises, but something else burned deeper. Lyra shivered, hiding behind a reef shadow. She whispered, "This will be the last time," though her heart already betrayed her words. The tide swelled like a witness, washing away prints, concealing choices. Finn whistled from the cliffs, a grin sharp enough to cut rope. He had seen Lyra's gaze linger too long. Finn said, So the sea witch has a crush, and laughter tangled with the wind. Lyra glared, her silence more biting than song. Finn leaned closer, voice lowered. Hell drown you faster than you drown him. Yet, there was no cruelty, only fear wrapped in wit. Lyra said, I saved him, nothing more, but her hand trembled against her chest. Finn snorted, then why blush when his name isn't spoken? The gulls shrieked above, mocking in chorus. Lyra turned away, but warmth betrayed her cold mask. Elias lingered on the shore at twilight, his boots half buried in wet sand. He hummed softly, the melody hesitant, as if asking permission. Lyra drifted closer in the surf, heart racing as she matched a note under her breath. Elias stopped, startled, whispering, "Who's there?" and his voice shook with both fear and longing. The tide carried her hum back, veiled but true. His eyes widened as he whispered, "I know you're real." Lyra trembled, torn between retreat and revelation. She whispered in thought, "If I step closer, the world will change," and her hand brushed the water like a vow. Cassian stood where the rocks split into jagged teeth, cloak torn, eyes dark with memory. Lyra froze when she saw him, heart clenching with old ache. Cassian said, "Did you miss me?" His voice bitter velvet. She whispered, "You should not be here." He laughed hollow. "I was once your shield. Now I'm only your shadow." His gaze lingered, wounded but burning. Lyra turned away, trembling. Cassian said, "You will regret choosing him," and the words dripped poison and sorrow. The sea churned behind him, echoing a bond broken yet unsevered. Riven emerged from the mist, a smile too perfect, eyes shifting like quicksilver. Lyra stiffened, knowing his masks never held truth. Riven said, "Need a friend," with voice smooth as oil. She said, "I need nothing from liars," yet her heart knew allies were few. He bowed low, mockingly graceful. Even liars trade useful secrets. His gaze glimmered with hunger for something deeper than coin. Lyra whispered, "What price?" and his grin widened. Riven said, "Only what you already fear to lose." The mist thickened, swallowing his shape, leaving her trembling with unease. Lyra learned the shape of silence by standing in it, until it fit. The cove breathed in small silver sighs, and she answered with none. She traced notes in her mind and let them die unborn. Elias gathered driftwood nearby and pretended not to look. He knew a fragile peace was walking between them. Elias said, "If I hum, will the sea behave?" and the tide curled like a listening cat. Lyra nodded once and pressed her lips shut. The world held its breath, and nothing shattered. A gull screamed and she flinched, but no power spilled. Elias said, "You do not need to sing for me," and the words steadied her like a hand. She smiled with fear behind it, and felt human for a heartbeat. The quiet grew strong enough to carry their hope. The shore wrote new rules in wet sand, and waited to see if they would hold. Elias knelt by a drift fire, and watched the smoke sketch memories. He spoke as if to the waves, not to her. Elias said, "My mother taught me lullabies the priests forbade." The fire gave a tired crack like an old secret. He added, "She said some songs heal, and some unmake chains." Lyra listened with her hands curled tight to keep from singing. The sea ticked against stones like a clock losing time. Elias said, "I learned to sing soft, so doors would open kindly." He stared at the surf and smiled with regret. Lyra said, "Your voice cut mine, and I did not drown," and the words trembled like a vow. The wind folded their confessions and carried them a little farther from fear. They watched the embers dim and did not move to feed the flame. Lanterns bobbed along the headland like hungry stars. Corvin's men laid iron charms in the rack and whistled false tunes. Riven watched from a shadow and pretended he was only smoke. He murmured, "They are netting the night," and his smile missed its mark. Finn crouched among marram grass and bit back a joke. He whispered, "If I laugh, they hear me die," and the wind agreed. A charm thrummed, and the water shivered out of rhythm. Lyra felt the wrongness like grit in her teeth. Elias said, "We must move before the tide turns cruel," and they slipped toward the darker path. Behind them, the headland sang a new, mean song. The cove learned to keep secrets with its mouth full of iron. Mira drew a circle on the table with salt and old patience. She did not hurry the truth because truth had teeth. Mira said, "A human voice can free a siren when it sings without fear." The lantern steadied, as if to witness. She added, "The same voice can enter if love is missing." Lyra closed her eyes and saw the reef like a blade. Elias did not speak because reverence felt safer. Mira said, "Your bond will ask for price and proof," and the salt line glittered like frost. The room smelled of kelp and warnings. Lyra said, "If I choose him, I choose the land," and the air pulled tighter. Mira nodded and did not soften the edges. The lesson pressed a bruise that felt like a promise. The rain eased to a hush as they reached the lee of a dune. They stood close enough to share one breath and not break the quiet. Elias said, "I will sing only what keeps you whole," and his voice shook. Lyra lifted her hand and found his face as if it were sure. The kiss began like a question and answered too much. The sea surged, and her magic woke like a startled heart. She felt the old pull drag at his will and panicked. Lyra tore herself back with a cry that was almost a note. Elias caught her shoulders and held without a sound. He looked at her as if she were a storm worth surviving. She whispered, "I will learn the quiet again," and the tide retreated, ashamed of its greed. They breathed until the night believed them. The tide shuddered as if a gate had cracked beneath the deep. Lyra clutched the sand and felt the ocean's hymn change. Mira's words haunted her like a tether. Elias said, "What does it mean?" his voice raw. She whispered, "Your song can unbind the seals that Corvin covets." The weight of it pressed on her chest. Elias stared at the water as though it were a stranger. He said, "So my gift is also a weapon." Lyra nodded, pain flooding her throat. The horizon seemed sharper, crueler. She added, "If he forces you to sing, the abyss will answer." The sea hissed as though agreeing. Silence stretched until the gulls dared it apart. Elias said, "Then I will never sing for him," and the promise rang brighter than the sun. Lyra felt both hope and dread coil into one breath. The bond had become their peril and their shield. Cassian waited at the cliff hollow, shadows like scars across his face. Lyra froze when she saw him, heart bruised by memory. Cassian said, "I betrayed you once, but I did it to save you." His words cracked like brittle stone. She whispered, "You damned us both." His laugh was hollow, broken. He said, "I carried guilt heavier than chains." Lyra's tears tasted of salt and fury. He stepped closer, eyes wild. Cassian said, "If I could undo it, I would trade my life for your freedom." She shook her head, trembling with grief and anger. He reached out but stopped before touching her. His voice lowered, yet still, "You look at him the way you once looked at me." His confession burned them both. Riven leaned against a weathered pillar, smirk faint but eyes restless. His voice flowed like silk hiding knives. He said, "I was Corvin's shadow once, sent to spy on you." Lyra stiffened, fury in her gaze. Elias stepped forward, fists clenched. Riven lifted palms in feigned surrender. He added, "But his leash cut deeper than freedom tastes." Lyra hissed, "Why should we trust you?" Riven's grin faltered, replaced by a flash of vulnerability. He said, "Because for once, I want to choose my own side." The mist curled between them like uncertain fate. Elias said, "Then prove it," voice cold but steady. The promise hung thin, fragile as glass. Mira spread brittle pages across the table, their ink alive with sea symbols. She said, "The prophecy was never curse but bond." The lantern trembled with each word. Elias leaned closer, face drawn. Mira added, "Only a sacrifice given freely can keep the abyss sealed." Lyra's chest tightened as she heard the weight of it. She whispered, "So one must fall for the other." Mira's eyes darkened with sorrow. She said, "The bond asks for proof, and love is the cruelest proof of all. Elias gripped Lyra's hand and said, "Then I will give whatever it takes." The silence after felt heavier than thunder. Mira whispered, "Choose carefully, for both fate and love hunger for you." Elias stood with the wind tearing at his coat, the sea raging like a beast. He turned to Lyra, voice raw with resolve. Elias said, "I would lose my gift before I lose you." She gasped, tears streaking her face. She whispered, "You cannot. It is who you are." He shook his head fiercely. Elias said, "My voice is nothing without you." Lyra's heart cracked under the vow. The sky roared with thunder as if warning them both. She reached for him, trembling. He pulled her close, forehead to hers, defiant against the storm. Elias whispered, "Let Corvin take nothing from us," and his promise burned bright. Lyra felt both terror and hope as the sea bowed unwillingly to their bond. The tower's black windows flared as Corvin's spell took form. Chains of light wrapped Elias, dragging him to the drowned temple. His cry split the night, raw and helpless. Lyra reached too late, her hand catching only spray. Corvin said, "Your voice will open the abyss," and his laughter was jagged stone. Elias struggled, throat bound by silence, fury burning in his eyes. Lyra screamed, "You will not have him," but the wards bit her tongue with fire. Finn cursed and said, "We're too slow," fists hammering against stone. The sea surged, answering its cruel master. Ravens scattered like shadows, carrying the Magus's triumph across the coast. Lyra's heart cracked under the sound of Elias fading into darkness. Lyra pushed through rain toward Cassian, breath sharp as glass. He leaned against broken stone, eyes bitter. She said, "Help me find him," her voice raw. Cassian smirked, but it faltered into pain. He answered, "Why should I help when you chose another?" Her tears streaked with fury. She said, "Because you still love me enough to hate me." He laughed hollow, clutching his chest as if it burned. Cassian whispered, "I betrayed you once, I cannot bear twice." She stepped closer, trembling. He finally said, "Then I will guide you to the gate, but it will cost us both." The vow tasted like blood in the air. Finn slipped through shadows, fingers quick as gulls. He snatched a ward stone from Corvin's sentries, heart hammering. He whispered, "If I die, at least I'll die useful." The stone pulsed, nearly burning his palm. Lyra hissed, "Careful. It will consume you." He grinned nervously, then let it choke on jokes. The guards' shouts echoed like drums. Finn darted into the reeds, cloak torn by thorns. He laughed under his breath, "Come catch me, you bastards," though fear clawed his ribs. The ward flickered in his grip, promising ruin or salvation. His courage wore the mask of mischief, but his eyes betrayed the terror. Mira stood in the doorway of the sea cottage, her lantern shaking. She said, "Love is a spell only truth sustains." Her eyes glistened with unshed grief. Lyra bowed her head, voice hoarse, "I cannot win without him." Mira answered, "You will win with him, or you will not at all." Elias's absence screamed in every silence. Mira traced runes in salt, her hand trembling. She whispered, "I have given my wisdom, now I give my prayer." Lyra grasped her hand tightly, whispering, "I will not fail him." Mira smiled sadly. "Even if you do, the sea will remember your song." The lantern flame sputtered like a heart in mourning. "Me!" The cliffs shook as the tide split to reveal a secret path. Riven stepped from the fog, smile thin. He said, "I can guide you past the wards if you trust a liar." Elias's cries echoed faintly from the drowned temple. Lyra whispered, "If you betray me, I will end you." Riven chuckled, "Then we are finally honest." Finn stumbled up, clutching the wardstone, chest heaving. He said, "Let's finish this madness before I faint." Lyra raised her chin, resolve etched in fire and salt. She said, "Then guide us, and we will break his chains." The path yawned dark, waiting to swallow them whole. The drowned temple loomed like a wound in the earth, black pillars dripping with salt. Lyra stepped onto the slick stone, her voice burning to rise. Corvin waited in the center, cloak torn by storm, his eyes bright with hunger. He said, "Sing for me, breaker of tides," and the air bent around his command. Elias strained against chains of light, his throat raw, but no sound came. Lyra whispered, "I will not let you use him," and the sea roared in answer. Corvin laughed. "You cannot resist destiny," his words sharp as blades. Finn clutched the wardstone and muttered prayers under his breath. The temple shuddered as magic bled through cracks in the floor. Lyra's heart raced, knowing the battle was not with steel but with song. Elias pulled breath through pain, his voice straining past the bonds. A single note broke free, trembling but alive. The chains hissed and split. Lyra gasped as her magic flared uncontrolled. The sea rose within the temple, crashing like a heart. Elias shouted, "I will not be your weapon," and his song twisted the bindings into smoke. Corvin snarled, "Fool, you unmake her with every word." Lyra staggered, her skin glowing faint silver as her immortality frayed. She whispered, "Do not stop," though terror shook her. The clash of voices filled the temple, shattering stone, unbinding centuries. Cassian burst through shattered gates, blade drawn, eyes wild. He roared, "You will not take her," and charged into Corvin's circle. Lyra cried, "No," but his path was already chosen. Corvin summoned a wave of shadows. But Cassian struck through with desperate strength. Blood streaked his side, yet he kept moving. He shouted, "Live, Lyra, even if I fall," his voice breaking. Elias pulled harder against song and chain, eyes wide at Cassian's sacrifice. The temple shook as the clash split air and water. Cassian's body faltered but his spirit blazed, buying them a heartbeat of freedom. Lyra stepped into the circle, heart trembling as silver fire licked her veins. She whispered, "I choose love over eternity." Elias gasped, shaking his head. He said, "Do not give this for me," but his voice cracked with grief. Corvin sneered, "Foolish child, your gift is wasted." Lyra lifted her hand and sang a note that cracked the ceiling wide. The chains dissolved, freeing Elias. She felt her power tearing away like wings broken from her back. Elias cried out, "Stay with me," but her body faltered. Mira's prophecy rang in her ears, "Love must be proven." Lyra's sacrifice filled the temple with a light older than the sea. The gate shrieked as the abyss clawed open, but Lyra's song sealed it shut. The sea roared, pulling Corvin into its dark mouth. His scream vanished beneath endless waves. The temple walls crumbled, salt mist blinding. Elias caught Lyra before she fell into the surf, his tears hot against her cold skin. He whispered, "You are mine, mortal or not," his vow burning through the storm. Finn stumbled forward, clutching the wardstone as it cracked and died. Cassian lay broken, but a faint smile touched his lips as he faded. The sea grew quiet at last, its fury spent. Lyra opened her eyes, weak but alive, her immortality gone. Elias held her as if the world itself depended on it. The sea sighed like a tired giant and settled into hush. Foam braided the broken stones and drew no blood. Elias held Lyra until her breath found a steady shore. He whispered, "Your heart is here," and she felt it answer. Warmth crept back as dawn smudged the clouds with pearl. Finn knelt nearby, shaking, and let a laugh escape. He said, "If this is winning, I prefer smaller victories." Lyra touched the water and felt only cold, not command. Grief edged the quiet where power once lived. She said, "I am still myself," and the words surprised her. Elias kissed her brow and promised, "We begin again," and the tide agreed. Fog coiled along the cliff path as a figure peeled from the mist. Riven-tipped an invisible hat, smile thin and human for once. He said, "Debt paid perhaps," and glanced away. Lyra studied him and answered, "Choose better roads." He shrugged as if choices weighed nothing. Finn muttered, "Try honesty before breakfast." Riven laughed softly, almost kind. He said, I keep one face for today, and pressed a token into Lyra's palm. It was a silver shard shaped like a tear. Elias nodded once, wary but grateful. Riven vanished into fog, leaving the air lighter and uncertain. Mira laid a cloak over Cassian where the stones kept their chill. She knelt with stiff grace and folded his fingers around a shell. Mira said, You once saved a child with a reckless heart. Wind moved through the cottage door like a hymn. Lyra stood silent, salt on her lashes that was not the sea. She whispered, He bought us a breath, and the words steadied. Elias bowed his head, honoring a rival who had chosen light. Mira traced a rune for mercy and let the lantern burn low. She said the price was steep, but love paid it true. The room held stillness that felt like blessing. The village mended nets while gulls argued about crumbs. Elias tuned a battered lute beside a stack of rope. He said, I will sing for hearths and not for gates. Lyra smiled and learned the weight of dry sand in her shoes. She carried baskets, traded names, and hid no scales. Finn bargained loudly and lost on purpose to make children grin. Mira taught herbs that calm storms inside the chest. Lyra said, I feared I would be less, and found she was more. Elias answered, You are enough without a crown of water. The day passed without omen, and that felt holy. Night pressed velvet over the bay and stitched it with stars. Elias and Lyra walked the quiet strand where their story had torn open. He said, I once feared my voice would take you from me. She answered, It brought me home. The surf breathed, small and kind. They stopped where moonlight paved the water. Lyra said, Sing with me, but only the soft parts. And he smiled. 2 notes rose, gentle as clasped hands, and drifted out to sea. The shore remembered and forgave. Their voices faded into a vow the wind would keep. The night held them like a promise that would not break.